Kenneth Branagh, you play a commander in Dunkirk, and anyway, for people who aren't aware and haven't seen the film, the character, right? Take us through who this guy is.
Well, there were a couple of key people as what you might call harbour masters in this temporary setup where at the end of a long walkway, which they call a mole, it was the spot from which, across this big tidal difference that the sea made, the big boats were loaded and offloaded, loaded with soldiers amongst the 400,000 who were trying to get off that beach. And there were a couple of very important people in that evacuation whose job was to maintain order and try and smoothly and compassionately get people onto those ships. And so Commander Bolton is made up of a couple of those people who were incredibly long-serving in terms of the days and days and days of that event. They stayed, and they stayed without sleep, and they communicated in very primitive ways, but they were part of just being the kind of policing that allowed the kind of chaos that wasn't ever very far from the surface to be contained, and for as many people as possible that way to get off the beaches.
Yeah, and you know, I found the film to be surprisingly quite emotional, and for your character, it was such a different perspective than the emotions that was being invoked by the younger cast. What do you think about how you were able to give that older perspective of a guy who's kind of seen it all before?
Well, I think Chris Nolan really wanted to see, in large part, how young the vast bulk of the army was there. They were, 17, 18, or early 20s. Someone like Bolton, who's been through another war, seen a whole generation be lost. For him, it's critically important that this generation can potentially be saved. And I think there's a great compassion as well as a sort of tough love that he exhibits. They need to have calm heads, and I think what was beautiful to play about Bolton was that he's the man through which passes really the most sort of miraculous moment of the story, which was when, in addition to the vast forces at work from the Army, Navy and Air Force, come all of these little ships. When all of England sends everything it can requisition, nearly 800 ships who came along, including a canoe, all the way up to little sort of cabin cruisers. All of England came to help out their boys. And this man who's been holding it in for the whole of this kind of endurance feat that is the evacuation operation, I think it was a beautiful thing to play how, if you're the first person to see that particular rescue element come in, not only for the fact of it, they'll get some more boys off the beach, but the symbolism of it. We are not alone. We haven't been given up on. They care about us back home, and they're doing something about it.
Yeah, and for me, the big theme of the film was, unflinching tenacity and, never giving up in the face of, odds. How did that resonate with you when you were trying to bring life to this character?
Well, one of the things that's very pleasing about being in a Christopher Nolan picture is if the historical character is required to stand on the end of a windswept jetty on a beach in Dunkirk, instead of standing in a green screen stage or a blue screen stage, you stand at the end of a jetty on a windswept beach in Dunkirk. And instead of someone saying, and do you know what, the Spitfire is going to be racing down past you, and I need you to imagine that instead you don't do that. The Spitfire races past you. The massive gunboat comes in on the left. The 100 guys run past you on the right. So he immerses you. And so it was possible because we basically would go out there in the morning and we'd stay there all day. And we did this for day after day after day. It was nothing as compared to the experience of the real people, of course. But in terms of a movie experience, trying to convey that, it got as close as you could get. And it allowed you to really immerse yourself in the character and be very sort of transported by it yourself. You really felt, once that uniform was on, once you were surrounded by all these pieces of equipment and also by the changing 4 times in a day weather, it was a great way to become sort of a time traveler back to that extraordinary moment. And I remember and value and feel very powerfully those moments of looking out into that ocean and seeing, sometimes you could see the glimpse of the UK. We're 26 miles away, you know. Just it's not very far and clear that you can see it. You can certainly hear it. You look back at that beach and see all those people. It was very hard not to feel the power of this incredible moment when Europe and Britain were so close and yet so far, and rescue was equally precarious, and we were the ones in the middle.
Yeah, you know, as a director, an acclaimed director yourself, what was your perspective on how Christopher Nolan tackled this film by using those three perspectives and relatively little dialogue, and he kind of put a different spin on the war film? What were your thoughts, given that you acted in it, but you also have so much experience with directing?
Well, it was to see someone who amassed an incredible pitch of preparation. When I first went to see him to talk about it, his house was absolutely packed with massive illustrations of the real battle and evacuation, of his preparation, what planes looked like, etc., shots and storyboards. So I saw all of that immense preparation. He was there at my costume fitting. We talked about the script in every single beat, every detail. We talked about the people it was based on. We talked about what we could and couldn't use. We talked about amount of dialogue, less, more. We read in every conceivable sort of soaking in of what you could do with it. But then on the day, with weather changes, with us dealing with the mechanics of a modern port, so sometimes our big boats had to wait while modern boats got through, you saw Chris Nolan improvising, but from this position of incredible strength. So I think that's the gift of a real artist, when the preparation and the technical knowledge is really supremely high. They just know what lens they need to use, at what distance from what character, and how the camera's going to move. But if suddenly some real life event, like the tide suddenly dropping, the weather clearing, you know, 400 more guys looking different in the frame than in the storyboards, he changed things. And he was able to do so from an immense feel for the story, because despite his determination to recreate and understand for a new audience the mechanics of that battle, it was always, as you were mentioning earlier, it was always from an emotional perspective, i.e. an involvement in what it would have been like to have been there, that he operated. So I learned a great deal about the capacity to both prepare like a crazy person, but also then be ready to sort of dance with it, which he always was very impressively, and encouraged us. So there was a great formality about the epic nature of it, but there was an improvisational quality as well.
Yeah. Speaking of your work as a director, you just brought back to life Hercule Poirot in Murder on the Orient Express. Why did you take that on? It's such a famous work. It's been done before, but you wanted to put your own spin on it. So what was driving that?
Well, I think great stories demand to be retold, and I think Agatha Christie's masterpiece is certainly worth many interpretations, including one here where, taking our cue from Dunkirk, we also shot on 65mm. We gave an immersive account invitation into the big world landscapes that are Agatha Christie's trademark locales. She made her detectives travel far and wide, and it means that you board that journey with them. In this case, you literally sort of get on the train and you go into the Far East. We start in Jerusalem, and then you go into the dark mountains of the Dinaric Alps in the former Yugoslavia. And the reason to do it again was to bring out what is central to it, this underlying primitivism. There's a revenge story of such sort of filthy passion that produces a moral conundrum that I found audiences really want to engage with. They enjoyed the gray area. Poirot says there's right, there's wrong, there's nothing in between. We'd all love that to be the case and to live our lives accordingly. But underneath this story, which at the center of it involves the death of an innocent, comes this very complex scenario where a civilized person may become a very primitive person. And along the way, you get a chance to see that by entertaining people with a puzzle that she keeps alive so brilliantly. 12, almost 15 characters, you might say, could easily have done it. Which one it is something that does keep people guessing. And despite what some people say, a lot of people just don't know how it works out, or have forgotten how it did.
Yeah, and apologies if you ask this all the time, but I'm fascinated by directors who direct themselves. And you're in the starring role. What is the most challenging aspect of directing yourself?
It's Well, actually, it's an interesting question, because in a way, the most difficult element is being free to direct other people without shortchanging your own performance. Because if your own performance isn't up to par, then you let the whole thing down. For me, one of the glories of playing Poirot was the amount of preparation time I had and the chance to be immersed in it. So to dive into all the novels, in the very process of assembling him, so handmade shoes, handmade suits, you were months and months of fittings that began to acquire a mental approach that was Poirotian. You became very, very obsessive and compulsive about order, symmetry, lines, weaves, fabrics. In his case, ultimately, the size your eggs are, if you happen to have 2 eggs of a morning, and that they're symmetrical and identical. This way of looking at things with this degree of order against an internal quality that actually is very sensitive, very romantic, quite melancholic, and that wants to impose that order on a life which almost causes him distress. For me, the most difficult thing was making sure that I had that time, and I took it. I really took it because I wanted to, when the show started, be super ready for everybody else. And so I felt as though I was able to start being Poirot months and months ahead as the director, in a way. And so it was actually almost unique for me, the marriage of the 2 jobs here, because the detective and the director were kind of one and the same. And the goal ultimately, just as Chris Nolan showed me in a way on Dunkirk, is prepare, 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 and then try and lift off into something where it is spontaneous, improvisational, and a happening is caught. And I felt there was something about Poirot's soul, that it was a beautiful, poignant sort of space to try and occupy. I felt that he was, sometimes you can't always say this about characters, but he, for me, in that immersive way, was good company.
That's nice. You know, you've done it on many occasions, but you're most renowned for being a multi-hyphenate in the film world, especially. But your adaptations of William Shakespeare's work is probably, you know, what you'll be renowned for the decades to come, even when you've retired. But what does he? I mean, he means a lot to me personally, and I always ask this question of people who do this work. What does he actually mean to you? Because seeing as you've done so much of his work.
From the first time that I saw what I would call a real account of his work, i.e. one where I was not aware of fusty old language or needing to have some sort of special entry into, but from where I was completely engaged by characters that I felt resembled people in my own life, but who spoke differently. And it wasn't so much the difference in what they said, but it was in the difference in how it made me feel. I knew that when performed with reality, this man went deeper into my psyche and into my soul, if you like. I felt changed watching him. That poetic voice, that ability to act on the senses in the same way that music can, where it isn't really an intellectual exercise anymore. You're simply experiencing something. So when you see, as I did early in my life, a production of Romeo and Juliet, where kids, it seemed like they were my age, in gangs, which was something I had some experience of watching, falling in love, which I certainly was, had some experience of, and it all mattering so much, and it all sort of transforming them. That sort of being caught up in that passion and just somehow feeling this difference, the feeling that you had an insight into human behavior. You didn't think about it consciously like that. It just had a very powerful impact that really stayed with me. And I felt, and have felt since, that he knows the human condition so well, and there's a compassion there, and intelligence, and also a sense of fun. Like Agatha Christie, if there was a litocratic oath as opposed to a Hippocratic oath, the rule number 1 might be first entertain. With Agatha Christie and with Shakespeare, it's first entertain. They entertain, and then beyond that, they just do something that enters the realm of the numinous, the otherworldly, the thing you can't put your finger on, that has the spiritual X factor that makes you feel as though your life has changed a little bit. And so he keeps educating me. For a man like me without religion, I ain't got that, I suppose, but I have got Shakespeare.
Yeah, I think that's quite fitting. Final question: given that we're an awards website, I'm curious. You have such a great awards history. You've got 5 Oscar nominations across 5 categories. I think you still hold the record there, dating back to 1989 with Henry V, actor and director, Hamlet. Also nominated for Best Supporting Actor in 2011 for My Week with Marilyn, and also for one of your short films in 1992. So that's incredible. You've got 5 Globe nominations. You won 3 BAFTAs. You won an Emmy for Conspiracy. I mean, I'm trying to be as short as possible with this, but I always ask this question because I'm curious. Like, that's really, really cool. But what do you think about that stuff? Do you care about accolades and awards for your films or for your performances? Like, what does it mean to you?
I must say that I relish the fact that we are so lucky in the work that we do to have ways in which that work can be recognized. Ultimately, I suppose what I feel is that if it gets recognized in these ways, you have more of a chance of an audience. And for me, that is the ultimate goal. The goal is to do the work to communicate with people. If these kinds of recognitions, can help celebrate that, bring more people to the work itself, then I think it's great. It's also, I think, we are lucky in the world we live in that this happens, but the idea of honoring talent and honoring hard work, I wish it went on more, not necessarily in big awards dues, but just on a daily basis. I'd certainly try and make that the case in my life, is to point out and say thank you and well done for people who make some kind of an effort, whether it's just on a personal level to be nice or kind, or in their work do exceptional things. I think the idea of celebrating and honoring big efforts from people to make a difference, small or large, can be a powerfully positive thing if understood in those kinds of terms. For me, it's it's overwhelmingly kind of an honor in these cases, but that it gets you closer to that audience is that exciting ultimate goal.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll see you on some red carpets this award season for both your projects. And thank you a lot for your time today. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Really enjoyed talking to you.